Okay, so I've kicked off the recording. So welcome everyone. Today's a special AU eRequesting Technical Design Group meeting. We're at the Trans-Tasman Symposium and HL7 Australia Connect-a-thon. We're in Sydney at the moment. First of all, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather today. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators and healers. And just a note today, people in the room and online, it is a hybrid, so note that there'll be photographs and videos may be taken. They'll be used on the website or in other publications. We're doing some recording of Vox Pops and that as well. So by entering this event, you consent to photography and video and using your image and likeness. If you do not wish to photograph or video, just inform the HL7 AU team. I've also just kicked off the meeting recording, so please be advised that this meeting is recorded, as are all technical design group meetings, and the recording will be made available on HL7 AU Confluence. And by entering this event, you consent to the recordings of your participation, including the meeting recording. So a bit of etiquette to today. This is a bit of different meeting to our normal TDG meetings. It's a hybrid meeting. So we've got people in person here in Sydney and obviously people online as well in Teams. So to make this work properly, can you please, to participate or ask questions, just raise your hand. And then that's whether you're virtually or in the room. Then I'll call you out so that we can, you have your chance to speak. We'll also be doing some mentees, some surveys and the like. So this is again different to how we normally operate under Zoom. That's the participation code we've got there for the mentees. There'll also be a QR code I'll show a bit later. So you can use that to participate in voting and in mentees. When you do speak, please just say your name and where you're from so that people know who's talking and for the minutes. And also just again, because it's hybrid, the chat won't be actively monitored. So if you are online, it's best you raise your hand and we might miss things that you're putting in the chat as the people in the room won't be able to see it. Overview of what we're going through today. We're just a TDG meeting, so we'll get our usual business, approval of minutes, update on action items and other updates. And then predominantly the main focus for today is talking about request groups. So this is something that's been around for a little while, been coming up at Connect-a-thons and other days. So we want to work through some of that detail today in a discussion. If we get to it, if we have time, we'll also look at the prioritisation of other features that we may look at for R1 of AU eRequesting. We'll see if we have time for that. If not, that will carry over to the next meeting. But if we do, that'll be great. So this is a Menti we're going to be using today for getting some feedback as well as voting. So if you can follow that or scan that QR code or join us at menti.com and enter the code that's on the bottom there. We're just going to do a bit of a practice poll and make sure that Menti is operating and you can all use it. So I'll launch Menti. Jump over here and I will present if I can find it. I'll get it on the right screen. Let's see. Oh, went a bit too far. Present that. Okay, and I think I can show a QR code here somewhere. Lag. Okay. Oh, my mouse. Okay. So this is just get an indication of who we've got here. Again, sometimes on these days we get people that aren't regular attendees, so it's just great to know what people we've got in the room and online. Hopefully we can get everyone into Menti, provide that information. It's great. We've got at least one first timer, so that's excellent. About numbers here. How many we got online, Michael? Do you think? Okay, so the AIs aren't going to vote, but hopefully everyone who's real can jump on and participate. Oh yeah, I think Steph has put the link in the chat. So if you've got access to the chat, you can use it there as well. Just to have another practice at some mentees. It's not something we do all the time. Oh, we've got 3 first timers. That's excellent. Welcome. Jump to the next one. This one's just, again, different type of question. Just gives an indication of your background. This is just really a practice, just so we can try a different type of Menti question. No others yet, so hopefully everyone fits in a box. Oh, was that you, Andy? Okay, that's good. Thanks for that. It's a nice mix of people, a good different sets of people, which is what we want to see. And then the last one is going to be a practice vote. So we do voting in the technical design group meetings where someone can propose a motion, then we ask for a second on that motion, and then we have a vote. So this is just a practice. We're not voting for anything real here. So responding is turned off. C to allow responses. How about now? Can people respond now? Yeah, there we go. And for these votes, we need a majority in the affirmative to pass. So if you're unsure, you don't want to vote, you can abstain. Otherwise, you vote affirmative or negative. Looks pretty good. That motion for practicing has passed. Mouse on that screen. Okay, jump back to the slides. So this is our usual business. This is what we go through in each technical design group. What we normally do is approve the minutes from the last meeting. So our last meeting was just last Thursday. So we won't do the approval of these minutes today. They've only just drafted. Hasn't been time for the TDG to review these. So we will just have a quick look at them and look to vote on those in the next meeting. I'll jump out of the Menti and jump to the minutes. Okay, so this is our minutes, a normal format of minutes. We've got who attended, and we have a copy of the slides, we have a copy of the presentation, and then we have all the discussions and the votes. So this is from the meeting from last Thursday. Like I said, we're not going to vote on this today, but have a look at this prior to the next meeting. If you have any amendments or any comments, you can comment on the page. You can make amendments as needed. So these are definitely out for review. So please provide any feedback if you've got any on the minutes from the last meeting. Again. So another thing is the action items for the previous meetings. I don't expect we would have any updates on any of these, given we went through updates last Thursday. But I will open the floor if we have any updates on any of those. I'm not sure if Jai's in the call, but he is. But I suspect there's no updates since Thursday. I'll take silence as no update. Didn't expect there would be. Just another update as well. So we are looking, there's an expression of interest out at the moment for sparked testing events towards the middle of the year. We're looking at potentially holding one-day testing events that would be across AU Core, Patient Summary, eRequesting, looking at the community to see what interest there might be in doing these. These are in addition to the connectathons that we're doing now, just special dedicated AU sparked testing events. These EOIs sort of will capture that information, who's interested in coming, what you're interested in testing, where you'd like to hold it, those sorts of things. So we can see if there's any interest in having some additional dedicated events for these. So please, if you have any interest in testing the specifications, complete that EOI so we can gather that information. So now the main discussion point for the day is around request group feature discussion. So this is something that has come up a number of times. We've had discussions at connectathons, on other workshop days about request groups. And this is to sort of a continuation of what we've done in those previous meetings. Bit of summary of what we've done to date, decisions we have made. So this is about the current features we have now in AU eRequesting for request groups. So what we have at the moment is we have diagnostic requests, and each diagnostic request is a self-contained and operates independently. On that service request, on that request, diagnostic request, we have a placer group number, PGN, and it's used to link multiple diagnostic requests that were created as part of the same order. I mean, I'm using order in quotes there, but the concept that multiple things are ordered at the same time. We also introduced just recently the diagnostic request display sequence that would match the sequence that would be shown, that would be equivalent to shown on the paper request form. So there was just talking about doing reconciliation, a collection or the like, where if we've got a paper form and we've got an electronic order, it's easier to reconcile if those orders, a display order would match the electronic. So that's something we've voted for and we've introduced recently. And then we have a task group as well. And that task group is there for the filler, for the management of the fulfillment tasks that are associated with the same order. So I'll just got a bit of a diagram here to demonstrate what we have. And this would be potentially where we have an eRequest with 3 separate requests in it that are all associated as part of the same group. So we have the diagnostic requests on the right, and each of those would have the placer group number and optionally a display sequence if it's important. We have a task diagnostic request, which is a fulfillment task. So that task there is for fulfillment. That also has a group identifier, which is the placer group number. The focus of that task is the diagnostic request, and it can be part of a task group or is part of a task group. And then that task group also has that placer group number. So you can see each of our items there have that placer group number that group it, as well as the task group. Now, I see Angus just walked out of the room, but Andy, did you want to talk about the role of that task group for fulfillment and its use in tasks? We have gone through it before. We have, oh, here we go. He just came back in with food. Yes, you do need a microphone.
Task group. So one of the reasons why we originally came up with task group was to enable easier discovery on the part of a filler of a request, an order, if you want to talk about orders being a set of requests, but discover the whole order. Doing so without a task group was quite convoluted because you're basically looking for newly created tasks that were assigned to you. And we in production have certainly seen examples where there are 40 requests for a single order. And if you're discovering based on just that child request, you'll get pinged 40 times for every when that new order is created. It's far easier to differentiate a task which represents a group versus a task that represents an individual order fulfillment. It's easier to discover those groups because that's you only get one ping per order. And I think that was, I can't remember, but I think that was probably one of the.
Yeah, notifications, subscriptions notifications was one of the primary reasons, so that we, as Andy just explained, I'm trying to think back, our early implementations was against AWS and it had numerous other issues, which this, remember Andy, we had half an order be consumed and the other half not. I don't know if that was related to this, but those problems are behind us with Happy Server. So I think the primary thing. It's this. Well, we are a Microsoft officer, so Azure is probably not bad, but so I think this subscription notification thing was the core reason why. Because I don't think Task Group even solved consuming half a request issues. Yeah, that's all I say.
Yep. Okay. And like I said, this is what we have now. So these are decisions we've made to date. This is currently in the AU eRequesting Fire AG now. This is stuff we can test at the Connectathon in the next couple of days. So this is the point we've got to now. Yep. Andy wants.
With task group, we do have another thing that's worth, I think, commenting on, and that is that the task group and what's on the slide with diagnostic request task is that they do share obviously the same set of attributes, and one of those attributes is clearly status. So with this, we have introduced this notion of a status of a group versus a status of an individual. And that is something that I think it's worthwhile being kind of aware of, because as we have this discussion around diagnostic request groups, you know, we I think we've talked about how those statuses may or may not be used in terms of their relationship. So, for instance, if you have a partially fulfilled order where some of the tasks maybe have moved to a completed status and some of them are still in progress, what is then the rule about the status of the group? And, you know, one way is to mandate the rule. So you could actually define it as a set of constraints in the implementation guide and effectively make the status of the task group computable. Or you can leave it up to the filler to interpret the meaning of different fulfillment statuses for the same order. And that's something we need to have a position on, I think, at some point.
I think Andy's demo that you showed in the current system, where if the fulfillment is cancelled because of some reason and it moves from one lab to the another, so it's in the current implementation, will it basically allow some tests in one lab, or it'll move as a complete bundle? And
No, it's a very good question. We at the moment have pushed the individual fulfillments to tomorrow, whenever tomorrow happens to be. And so we treat it as a whole order. So there is, and I think in Spark, we are going to probably do that. We should do the same thing, because I think to do justice to partial fulfillment, it's actually a much bigger problem. So we'd have to, I think, start looking at things like sendaways and what happens when you start splitting orders potentially. Now, fire tasks, I think, have all of the building blocks to do it, but it would be, I think, a much more complex workflow to define in a way which was consistent in its use. So I think it would be easier now to not make any hard and fast rules around the relationship between the tasks. We at the moment only display the group status, and in future what we would do is to somehow highlight whether the group is different from its children, any of its children. And if it was, we'd probably give a bit of a call out to say, even though this group is marked as complete, you have children that aren't in that state, and therefore you might want to dig in on the thing. But obviously this becomes difficult. As I say, we've run into, I don't know which specialist it is, but we've got at least one who's ordering 40 tests. And just the logistics of trying to display that, it's an exceptional. But even if I think you talk about a dozen of them, it's a whole other user interface thing that we've not dealt with before. So yeah, we're kind of pushing that down the road a bit for the moment.
just to complete that, like say in these kind of more complex scenarios, if we are considering it, so I think the tests ultimately are kind of quite location dependent. So the pathology service being provided with whatever code it is dependent on under the same, say, business holding company or whatever in the lab, but it could be different locations where those particular tests under that banner or brand is provided. And if we don't have something like a endpoint type thing which distinguishes those, the workflow for communication is more dependent on how the repository treats that internally for those three or multiple locations. So for a more practical, like we are doing that, some of that in our e-referrals kind of use cases, where first there is a triaging layer and the orchestration engine has to kind of decide based on communication with the final endpoints there. And if it fails, then that orchestration layer makes a decision of how to split it up into multiple endpoints, or we say, no, we're not going to worry about it, and we're just going to pass through and let that endpoint decide what it wants to do. But that logic has to be somewhere to be split up on multiple locations.
I'd make the comment that you almost seem to be, it seems to be talking about sendaways within the lab, or at least the pattern is the same. And I see that as just a replication of the pattern, right? So let's say the doctor orders this group with 3 tests and you receive that into your organization. And then you might go, oh, the first test is going to be done by our sub lab A, and then the second test by B, and the third test by C. You're just going to carbon copy the process. You can create a new group task for lab A with test 1, a new group task for lab B with test 2, and a new group task for lab 3. So you repeat the pattern layer behind. And yeah, so the mod still stands. What you do behind your wall is really up to you. You do whatever you like, but you can just repeat the pattern. You just, internally treat it like another group of 1 to this guy, group of 1 to that, and group 1 to the other. No, because to the front system, so the ordering system being Magentus or whoever that is, they just see this set, right? And yeah, I guess you've got this. So the status updates coming back have to corral back to a central point and then back to here. But I mean, that to me makes logical sense. Like, to start making it distributed gets crazy, right?
But you would also, you can define the intent of the order would be, there's like a derived order, and you can refer back to the original order. So if you ever get the access to the derived order, you can go back, because I know no, yeah, it's in the service request, but I know government are quite interested in making sure that any filler, be it a send away filler or an original filler, always has a view of the whole order. So, because what in theory might happen now is that the order gets split and you're actually unaware that it's actually a split order. So you only see the component that you've been asked about, and that then, especially if we start introducing some kind of pre-authorization process in this, then, or claiming, yes, it becomes more complicated.
I think in the current demo that we saw, the placer system's doing it some in
Doing the claiming.
the same, like if it's split or if it's cancelled. So no, there's no splitting yet.
The places don't split, at least, yeah.
Okay.
Back to Michael.
Sorry, there's a lot of conversation in the room. Hopefully you can hear everyone. You might not be able to see them. The room video isn't working, but you probably don't need to see their faces anyway. But please let us know if you can't hear them. Trying to make sure everyone's got a microphone when they're talking, but people are very enthusiastic. So we'll just make sure that we get onto that. Okay, so this is good discussion because this is leading into what else we need. So like I said, this is what we have now. We've had some discussions before. I'll just jump to that. There is a discussion page that we have in Confluence. I will just show that, which has captured some of the things we've discussed in the mouse. Other connect-a-thons and like. So I think Steph's put that in the chat. So back in August last year, we had a conversation about groups at a connect-a-thon. We did some whiteboard sessions here, and we talked about task groups, which we now have. We also talked about service requests here and whether we want one and what form it might be, and about whether we reference observations and like. We've also, in this page, if I can scroll down, we had a scaffold branch that was way back in the beginning of eRequesting. That was something we used as a bit of a reference. It had some stuff in there. We talked about different types of groups, lists and sequences and all sorts of things. So there's been a discussion page going along here with different things that we've talked about. And what we try to like to do today is kind of bring this to a bit of a head and work out what we need moving forward. So I'm going to do a Menti now, which is going to open the floor to, are there other request group features that we want in AU eRequesting? So this is, like I said, we've just went through what we've got. We've got task group, we've got place a group number and the like. So we've got a Menti here for everyone online and in the room to use, but I do need to launch it. I'll pop that QR code up in the Menti as well once I get there. Yeah, sorry, it'll come back. You're too slow. Oh.
Otherwise, I'm like, stop it. You're moving too fast.
All right. So I will launch this one again. Oh, did it change?
They go every 48 hours. So that depends on when you thought the 48 hours started.
I checked just before the meeting. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So I will present. Oh, yeah. So I'll get on the right slide. My mouse is lagging. Maybe I'll put the wrong QR code in there. So this is really just an option for anyone to say, to encourage some feedback on what else we want. And if we don't need anything, that's fine. So, sorry, Heath wants to talk. I need some microphone.
Question. A bit out of the loop, but did we get the sequence number in?
Display sequence is in.
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, this is going to make for an easy meeting. We don't need anything. Well, we actually already have a request group. We have place a group number that is a group, right? So, yeah, so this is really talking about what else. I mean, something that has come up before, and I don't know whether it's relevant before, is about common clinical notes or that apply across the entire order. At the moment, they're all separate requests. You have to put the clinical notes in each request. Is that okay? Is that?
That's what I was thinking, that I don't think clinicians ever write a clinical note for each test. They just write it for the group and here's all the tests they want. The other thing I think that the group's useful for is the test reconciliation. So they might request half a dozen things, but it all comes back on one report. And so you want some way to group that to know that that group has all been satisfied now by this other report.
Yeah. So that was definitely, the one that has come up in the past. I mean, that's not new, that concept of clinical notes. I mean, the fact that the clinical notes is on each request doesn't mean that the clinician has to enter it against each one. The system can do that when it's creating the bundle or the like. It can copy the clinical notes. The user interface might only have one box, but it would copy against each of them. I'm sure Angus can actually talk about some of the issues he has in current world with having to reconcile clinical notes.
Yeah, so clinical notes has been one of the toughest parts with our production system with this. And we have a rule at the moment which keeps it safe but is rather brutal, which is that all the service requests notes, so all the clinical notes written on each service request in the group must be equal to each other, which gets a little weird when you've got them maybe providing some clinical information about a pap smear or something, but then that has to be stamped onto the liver function test clinical notes because we want them to all be consistent. And so we have that rule in the Sonic interfaces, which we reject the whole order if there's clinical notes that are different on one to the other. And that sounds weird, but the reason is because otherwise we end up with, like, say, 5 clinical notes on each service request, and then we've got some job to dedupe them. And I guess the reason we're doing that is because in our laboratory system, we do not have clinical notes per test item. We have them per group, right? So then, so I could do the layman's thing, which is just grab the clinical notes from each one of them and just dump them all into this one, and then it would just look horrible. It'd be like repeating this phrase over and over and over, but at least I'd capture it all. otherwise I'm like going, oh, is this one equal to that one? It is. So just put it in once. And then when they're not equal to each other, like you're then trying to dedupe them. So the problem is deduping just becomes horrible. So there's this idea that you have somewhere that all the service requests point to, and the common clinical note goes in there. And then I know it's common, right? Because even though all 5 of them point to the one, I know there's only one, so I just put it in once. So that's, yeah, so clinical notes has this whole problem which we haven't really solved yet.
And I guess something that I've experienced is diagnosis is attached to the billing. So depending on the condition, the particular billing is for that type of test if you're going privately. And so if that's not attached to that specific test and it's just up that top level, then you're probably going to get billed inappropriately for that test because it's not attached.
Agree. So you know, I'm probably jumping ahead here. I'm not proposing we only have one global clinical notes, but something like we have a global clinical notes and we have notes per test, right? And then at my level, I'm not going to do any fancy deduping or anything. I'm literally going to take the global clinical notes and put it into my clinical notes, and then I'm going to take each one from the single and put them in, and that's going to be the whole, right? Now, if you, the placer, chose to repeat it, well, that's kind of your fault, right? But at least now I don't have to do any tricky deduping or anything. And you get what you were saying, like if you want to write a particular thing about this test, and that is lost even today, right? Like if you write hepatitis immunization or testing for acute hepatitis, and that's related to the hepatitis test, today that's not programmatically connected, that clinical note, to the hepatitis test. It just gets put in the episode's clinical notes, and humans are clever enough to go, well, they're obviously talking about the hepatitis test, right? But so even today, even in a V2 message, you can put notes per test, but Sonic's system and every PAS system I've seen in Australia doesn't have clinical notes per test. It has one box for the episode.
Danielle's got a hand up in the room.
I do. I am playing both facilitator of microphones, and in this case, I have a particular content comment, which may or may not be relevant, and I hope I don't derail the conversation, because as far as I can tell, this is largely around going, what are concepts of interest? And I think clinical notes has come through as a concept of interest, regardless of how that might be implemented. I do have a particular comment on dealing with the fact that a source or a single instance of a clinical note might show up in multiple places, that in FHIR you can do narrative linking. We've seen some of that show up in bundles. So for those of you who've been on the HL7 journey before FHIR, and you might have seen CDA, which had this whole, we've got structure and you can link it to narrative and go, this bit of text, I actually mean it's that thing over there. You can also do that in FHIR. So I don't know if that will help, but it's also possible to have defined a bit of text and then everywhere else with a specific ID go, I mean that bit of text over there. That may be something that when you do get to discussing how to support this could be a factor. Sorry. Yeah. So I guess that's my point about two things. One, I think maybe this topic is done. It seems relatively relevant, but in terms of the how, that's a future. That's more. Yeah.
I guess what we were trying to get here was people to think of all the things that were common to the whole group, so that we've sort of got sight of them, because we assume that that's the sort of thing you might put on some group construct, whatever that is. And once we sort of know what those things are, we can then start thinking about solutions. And when we think about solutions, we can say, well, is that going to work for all these things? You know.
Okay, great. Rosemary?
Hi, Rosemary Villado from SA Pathology. Just to answer, I don't know who was speaking earlier, that you haven't seen the possibility of clinical notes being on the or specific to an order. Certainly in hospital electronic world, you have the ability to do that. So you can have clinical note which applies to the whole request, or go down to clinical note to the individual order. So that HL7 example you gave, you could certainly put it against the clinical notes of the HL7 order only.
Yep.
I don't know also when we're talking about grouping, whether there's specimen notes we need to include on this.
Was that notes on the specimen?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think at this point in time we had specimen as out of scope.
Okay.
But that is worth noting. I think what Angus sort of said there is the theme I'm seeing here. There are things for a group are things that are common for the group. That's the thing we haven't necessarily addressed to date in the TDG. Would anyone disagree that that's not the theme we're seeing here? Or is there anything else other than that sort of theme of we're looking for commonality, things that are common in the group to apply to a group? Yeah. I'm looking for anyone to disagree with me that the theme is we're looking at common things for the group. Is something we haven't addressed yet for eRequesting? Roundabout. Oh, interesting. Okay, does anyone else have anything that they haven't added to the Menti they would like to add to that?
Okay, coming to Andy.
I think, so the two things that are in play is notes and then supporting information. And supporting information, as I read it, is clinical in nature. So we don't really have a clinical note within the resource. And the note, the example that the resource gives is for things like billing information. So there is certainly no reason that we couldn't, from a set of individual requests, reference a common supporting information element, because that's the reference. But with anecdotes, with annotations, so the notes being a set of annotations, I think it's understanding what are the use cases for those potential notes as annotations, and whether they are at the same potential level of complexity that supporting information is going to get to. I mean, I'd also say that when Angus and I sat through the O&O teleconference, one of the things Lloyd raised, which I think is also worth considering, is he was quite adamant that each service request should be able to stand on its own, and so shouldn't be only partially complete without the addition of some shared information. And the reason for that is if you start doing things like splitting orders, and I guess this is the other thing that we at the moment are not allowing for much flexibility on the requesting side. Fulfillment, we've talked about flexibility and that different pieces get fulfilled potentially different time, or different parties do different parts of the fulfillment. But then there's also splitting on the other side as well. So I don't know, I think we just got to be careful about, like, in the number one thing here is clinical notes, which does not have a home in their current resource definition.
Yep, I think that's a good point. They was modelled separately in AU eRec DI as clinical context as well for those clinical notes, which we've kind of said there was as distinct from notes on the resource, and they were identified as separate things. We've kind of, at the moment, said, well, they'll both go into the notes on the service request resource, but they are potentially need to distinguish between those two things for some of those reasons. Yep.
So I'm going to make one more observation, which is where this is problematic is where the content is free text like clinical notes, because you can't programmatically deduplicate easily. When it's things like billing code or pregnancy status, it's far easier as a developer to go, all these pregnancy statuses are equal true or pregnant, right? So I can safely dedupe and just put it in once and say the patient's pregnant, right? Or if I get an order where it's like patient's pregnant on this one but not on that one, I can error and say, well, that doesn't make sense, right? So if it's codified information, it's not such a bigger problem, but when it's textual information, it's like you just can't dedupe it, right?
I mean, okay. A, yes, but B, weeds. I reckon from this mentee, which was just let's come up with a list of topics, I feel like we've gone well past that, suddenly into trying to work out how to even solve it. So I reckon we're past this kind of question.
Yeah, we're going to the next bit, which is great.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good lead in.
Sorry, I'll stop. Please move on. Yes.
No, that is we're actually are moving ahead, which is good. But I'll take that through a bit more formally now, if I can get my mouse to move. Oh, missed it. Got it. All right, I'll jump back to the presentation. So from that mentee, we gathered some concepts around what we might need to additionally do with groups in eRequesting. So what I wanted to do next was actually walk you through what some of the FHIR guidance is on service request groups. So we can see what that guidance is. We can see, does that any of it make sense to us? Does it align? Are there things we want to consider and look through? So the next few slides are a summary I've made of the FHIR guidance on service request groups. So I think Steph will throw these links in the chat, so you can look at the detail. This is summarised, so the detail is actually in these links. But there's a lot of info in there. So I tried to summarise it the best I could into some slides to make it a bit more palatable. But on the service request resource itself, there is a scope and usage section. And basically, it says that a service request is a request resource from a FHIR workflow perspective. And in that FHIR workflow perspective, a request resource describes what activity is desired or authorized. Requests do not track the execution of fulfillment. So that's why we have tasks, and they're there to track the fulfillment of the request. But from a service request point of view, we are looking at what activity is desired or authorized. It's not the tracking. So just to put that in context. And then in that scope and usage as well, it says that the service request resource allows requesting only a single procedure. If a workflow requires requesting multiple procedures simultaneously, it is done using multiple instances of the resource, which is what we've modeled. That's what we showed in the diagram earlier. That's what's modeled. And these instances can be linked in different ways, depending on the need for the workflow, and for guidance, refer to the request pattern. So there is a FHIR request pattern that the guidance is saying you should be using something from this pattern when you're looking at groups. So we'll go into that request pattern now. Again, all the details here, the links are here when you want to go through and read it, the full detail. But the FHIR request pattern is a pattern to be followed by resources that represent a specific proposal, plan, and/or order for some sort of action or service. So it is a generic pattern. It's not a specific pattern that necessarily applies to everything, but it is some guidance for those scenarios. And in that request pattern, there is the concept of compound requests, which is in what we're talking about here is around request groups. It doesn't actually define what compound is. It just starts using the term compound, but we can assume that that applies to our scenario here where we're looking at a group of requests. And there are 3 different ways to define compound requests in FHIR, and that's with a shared requisition ID, a based on chain, and a request group. Now in R4, that profile is called request group. In R5, the name is actually changed to request orchestration. So just noting that, that name has changed. So I'm going to go through each of these. Please raise your hand. We'll stop to discuss. But as we go through, let me know if you've got questions. So the first pattern was the compound request for a shared requisition ID. So this is used to link multiple requests created as part of the same event, and it allows business processes, e.g. payment rules, to recognise simultaneous requisition-based ordering. Each request operates independently with its own status changes. And then, yep, Andy's going to jump in now. That's great.
So when we're talking status changes here, we're talking status changes of the request, not status changes of its fulfillment. And I think that's an important differentiator, because we have to be really careful, because when we talk about workflow, we're talking about fulfillment and service request. You can have multiple fulfillments of the same service request. So when we talk about you don't necessarily need a one-to-one match between service request and fulfillment. And in particular, if you look at something like Rule 3 exemption, you've got one service request and multiple fulfillments over time. So I think it's just a lot of people don't, want to talk about the status of the request and the status of the fulfillment of the same thing. But I think it's important to differentiate them.
Yeah, that's really important. That's why we put in that previous slide about the service request is not about tracking the fulfillment, right? So the service request is about the request itself. I don't know them off the top of my head.
One.
Active. Oh, that's the only one that we really, it's active.
No, the end ones are kind of more common.
Yeah.
So completed and active. But the ones in the middle are actually more distinct from a request and fulfillment. So obviously in fulfillment, we got, in progress and,
on hold.
and received and accepted and those kind of things. Whereas the request is like requested an error, whereas you wouldn't have a concept of fulfilled an error. That doesn't make any sense. So they actually overlap, but are quite different.
Good point. So, so the request operates independently of its own status. So that's the request status we just said, not the fulfillment status. And then common information, patient, practitioner, authored on, can be seen in any request instance that shares the requisition ID. So this was the point that was made earlier as well, is that each service request references a patient, it references the practitioner, it has its all. So we're duplicating this information in each one. So you can look at any of the requests and see the information that is related to it. No.
Refer to different patients.
Sorry, yes.
In the same thing.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be the same, but you would look at the individual service request to see what's relevant for that service request. So.
Well, you could with, for instance, is there any need do you have to have authored on exactly the same time? Or, could you have a single order through a consultation and actually say, oh, I'll order this one first and then this one second. And so the authoring of that service request might be different than the ordering of the next service request, even though they actually share the same requisition ID.
But we're not proposing that it would be commonplace that you would have different patients on different service requests in the same group.
I think
even though technically that's a possibility.
Well, when we say not common, I guess the question is, do we want to stop that?
I'd like to say yes.
I think there is more detail in. I'll just see if I can jump to the page.
What about the case of genetic studies and family studies? And you might have some common information to that family.
Yeah, but I think we're getting off track. But
Yeah.
yeah, point taken.
I do just want to jump, see if this was in there because I did summarize. So there is more detail in here. Oh man, this mouse. Like I said, there's more detail in here. I was trying to summarize, but we'll see if what the exact wording is in here. Oh, wrong one. It is worth making the note. Hello. All right, I'm going to skip that because mine has frozen. All right, I'm not going to let you all watch me fumble with the mouse. So I'll move on. I think we've made the point though that it doesn't say. So we would have to work out whether we want to apply rules over whether these things can only reference common things or they can be different or the like. I think that's something we can come back to. It's not important right now for the pattern. These are the concepts in the pattern. I think then on the bottom one too is about common comments on. So this applies to our clinical notes potentially. Common comments or notes that span the entire requisition should be captured as observation or communication instances and linked to relevant request instances using request.supporting.info. Now, I don't think we need to get too caught up now about observation, communication, what that resource type is, but the concept here is that common comments or notes would be captured in a separate instance and linked to the request instance using supporting info. So that's the guidance that's being provided here for this pattern. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on that pattern before we go to the next one?
So you're opening it up for whether or not people have questions about the linkage of this kind of concept through service request supporting information. Yeah?
Yeah, or anything else on this pattern. This is the summary of the pattern. So we're going to go to the next one next. So if there was any other comments on this, just before we move on.
And we do. Handing over to Michael Osborne.
Just confused whether that helps with your individual service request notes versus your common order notes, everything.
We will, there are some slides further more specifically about notes. So I think it does say common here. So the things that are common would be there. Things that aren't common, I take that as are on the service request. Things that are common are in this other resource.
And coming over now to Heath.
I think the point of this slide goes back to what you said before. It's like basically repeat everything everywhere.
Yep.
Because they need to be readable independently.
Oh. All right, I might jump to the next one now. So this is the based on chain pattern. So here, components of a parent request are not treated as components, but as separate orders executed as part of the fulfillment process or the parent order. That's a mouthful, but we'll go on to the others. So this is the example that is in the FHIR pattern. It's not necessarily applicable to us here, but it's just the example that is part of the pattern. A lab order might spawn child orders to draw the specimen, treat the specimen, run tests, and create the report. Each child request uses request.basedOn to reference the original request. And the base request and fulfilling requests have a relationship, but their statuses transition separately. So my take on this is that there's a relationship between these requests of some sort, just based on that example about the child orders and drawing the specimen, treating the specimen, running tests, creating the report. Other than that, the guidance on the other one was more specific about grouping them so they can be grouped for things like billing and other details like that. Specifically talks about the shared clinical notes and things like this. So this example doesn't have as much detail or as much information that kind of lines up with what we're doing. But I'd be interested in what others think about this pattern and its applicability to what we're doing.
I was just going to make the comment that the example's rather hard to follow, but I would call it a reflex test. So you're doing another test in response to, say, the results of the first one, or self-determined tests where the lab decides to do an extra test based on some other test's results. I think that's what the example's trying to say in a very convoluted way.
Yeah, I think it's a really confusing example, and I don't think it's helpful, because I think what it's trying to draw out is that you're asking for, it's like, drive the car is the order, and then to drive the car, you've got to open the door, that's a sub order, and then you've got to do these other things as a series of activities associated with the overarching activity. And I think that's all very interesting, but I would struggle to see that mapping into what we do.
I was going to say the example should read, a lab order might spawn child orders to go and get the specimen from the fridge, run another test on the specimen, and create the report.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be as complicated here. I think for me, it is about the fulfillment process. In other words, it's a order spawned by the filler, not the placer. So basically the preceding one example of using requisition ID was for the placer to compound. This appears to me to be compounds from the filler's perspective. Yeah,
I think it's definitely not as clear, but I think that's the kind of similar conclusion that I would have, that it's that next level down. So next level down from the original request to do something additional. Okay. I might move on to the next one. So the next one is request group, which sounds like exactly what we want. It's exactly what we're talking about. Request group, right? But you'll note in R5 it changed to request orchestration, and I think that's for a good reason because of its definition. So using the request group or request orchestration resource to assert complex timing and dependencies between a collection of requests. So the R4 definition of request group is a set of related requests that can be used to capture intended activities that have interdependencies, such as give this medication after that one. The definition hasn't changed in R5 other than the name. And in this pattern, all reference resources cannot be interpreted independently. The status of the parent cascades across all components. Component options, suspending, cancelling, and completing applies to all. Divergent status is required, creating child request using the based on approach. So it's still reasonably confusing, this definition as well. But I think that asserting complex timing and dependencies between a collection of requests is the key to me take away from this. So they're the three patterns. Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't see any hands up, but yes, any comments or questions on that one? Yeah.
I'd make the comment that I've played with this in the scope of decision support, where we have a system that asks what are the patient's conditions, and then we reply with suggested tests, and that's where you would use this request group. It's where you'd say, oh, for this condition, we'd suggest these 5 tests. So it's not about ordering tests; it's about like a plan as to in this condition do these tests, not an order for actual tests.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. My question was that about reflex test?
Absolutely no. No, the previous one was reflex test, the based on, where you're doing like reflex, you're reflexing, you're in response to one results of one test, you're doing another. That was based on. This slide's about pre-planning the sort of tests you might do for a certain condition, irrelevant of any particular patient. It's like, given these conditions, I would suggest you do these tests, but not the instance of doing them. It's the definition of that.
So that's decision support for the that's kicked in during the ordering process, or during
out of scope of what we're doing now.
Okay.
But if you're building a decision support system, you would most likely use these resources as the rules to hold the rules.
So in America, they have the concept of order sets and stuff like that, and they're actually really quite complex protocols. And I think this is what they're using to actually represent those things. So if they've got, a particular result of this, and this, then do this. It's a real complex protocol procedure. Do these things in order to satisfy this particular, for lack of a better word, protocol.
Okay. Well, that's a summary of the request pattern that FHIR defines. So I was going to jump to another Menti now, which is, what is your preferred request pattern for implementing AU eRequesting request groups? But I do need to launch that. Fine. Oh. No. Oh, will. But yes. Oh. Yeah, I'm just struggling with this mouse. And yeah, it's here. I got it. Oh. Yeah. Okay. It's fine to say I don't know if you don't have a specific opinion. Oh, there is a hint though on this. We are currently doing the requisition ID. We currently are using place a group number across all of our resources, and that is the pattern we currently have. No, I'm just informing you that we have already applied one of these patterns. So. Oh, we have another. So who's gonna say it?
I'm just wondering why we haven't considered bundle here to collect these items together.
So we haven't worked through this yet, but the bundle can be there for the creation of the order. But then are they stored as the bundle? Is it they only exist? They can't be processed separately outside the bundle?
So they've still, each item inside the bundle would still be separate and complete, but then it could reference other resources within the bundle, like the clinical notes that we were talking about, things like that. Anything else? Right.
Can't reference it. You can't reference the individual elements from outside.
From out, you would need to split the bundle, yeah.
Yeah, which kind of defeats the purpose.
But I mean, are you then, if you had these inside a group, how would you be processing that group?
Well, when we say process, we're talking fulfill.
Fulfill, yeah.
Yeah. So each individual fulfillment needs its definition for fulfilling. So how would you tie them together?
I'm not sure. I'm just trying to equate this to something like a medication request and a group of medication requests, which would be going in as a bundle, because that's kind of a similar pattern.
But you could do medication in the same way, right? So, if you split a medication order, for instance, then you can still track individual fulfillment of the medication.
Yeah.
But as soon as you throw them into a bundle, at some point you're saying it's pretty much an immutable kind of concept from a FHIR perspective at that point.
Yeah.
And if you pull it apart, you effectively then have to reconstitute a set of other bundles, and you could potentially get down to a set of bundles, each of which has a single element in, and it kind of then becomes a bit of a moot point. The question is, why do you even need, what is the need for the set? So if you're going to do a bundle, you wouldn't be doing it because of the service requests. You'd actually be doing it for the other stuff that comes with them.
Yeah, for the other stuff that goes along with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that comes back to the question of, well, how do we want to bind that? Because you could do it as a, not only a bundle, you could do it as a document. Yeah, and that's why we started looking at lists. And FHIR basically has about 4 collection
there's a few
approaches.
Types, yeah.
But the question is, do you want more flexibility? Because the fulfillment is driven independently, not through a group. So, one of the things Graham early raised in this is he suggested, when we put forward a task group, he said, well, you need a request group. But that makes the picture look pretty. But we struggled to find a realistic reason.
So the actual requirement comes back to, can you hear me or not?
Yeah.
That the placer and a lot of the PMSs, maybe not so much in the hospital systems, but more in the PMSs, they actually have one order where they can actually order 3 tests. And I think there's some weird funding models as well, where there's a limit of the number of tests you're allowed to order, or that you won't get paid for all of them as well. So basically there is a requirement to know that these tests were actually ordered as a collection, and comes down to something as simple as potentially a QR code or something like that at the moment. At the moment, there's a piece of paper with 3 orders on it, and we're effectively mimicking that, and I guess the digital equivalent of that in the future.
I was going to make a comment. So talking about a document, like a bundle, putting it in a bundle and a document, we've got the issue that because we want to do request claiming or sharing, so this request has been made out to Sonic, and then the patient goes to Helios, and we want to move it to Helios. So you end up with like creating a document, and it's those tasks that say it's assigned to Sonic, right? So you can create a document that sort of includes the tasks and documents that this order's been placed and it's assigned to Sonic, and that's kind of an immutable document. Then the patient goes to Helios. Now we have to break the document apart, reauthor it to be assigned to Helios, re-sign it, and the requester's not going to do this, right? We're not going to contact the requester and go, so, can you reauthor this document because it's been assigned, moved to Helios? So that was the inflexibility of the document. It's sort of when it's a document, it becomes this immutable document created by the placer, and now we can't change it, right? We wanted it to be more dynamic, so we get the intent of what he wants us to do, but who does it can shift around depending on the patient, right? So you could argue maybe the patient's reauthoring the document, but it gets complicated. Yeah.
Okay, I'd be interested. There's 2 there for request orchestration, which should have actually said request group. But does anyone want to talk to that online or in the room? Whoever may have suggested that. No.
But to the people who voted for request orchestration, I'd advise to go read the definition of the resource, read what it's used for, and I did exactly the same thing. It felt like the right thing by its name, but then as you read the definition of it, you start to realize it's really not what we want.
Other than that, then I think that's We just talked about the other. That's what we just talked about. So I think that reaffirms the approach we've got today, which is we are currently using requisition ID. We are currently following that pattern with our placer group number. So I think that was a good process to go through to reaffirm that. We only have about 10 minutes left. I do want to talk a bit about some of the guidance on notes as well. So we will jump to that. See if we can get through that in 10 minutes. Maybe not. We can, if someone wants to motion to accept that that's the pattern we apply, we're already doing it, but yes, we can reaffirm that if someone would like to make a motion for that.
Okay.
I mean, there wasn't a motion, there wasn't a second, so it wasn't an actual vote, it was a survey.
So because there's discussion in the room about, I guess, a point of order of what does it mean to have this mentee. So point of order, my understanding that what's been done is more of a temperature check.
Yeah, it was a preferred. What's your preferred?
Of what has already been voted and agreed to be present, to do a temperature check to see if some other decision needs to be made, and there's been no indication that says you need to do further work. Is that what we're doing? Yeah. Unless anyone from this group wants to either make a motion or raise a piece of specification feedback, I guess what you're indicating is we've rechecked that this is the course everyone's on and we'll keep going forwards.
Yep.
Okay.
Can I call out the elephant that's not in the room? So we're acutely aware that Telstra Health has gone more down the road of having a group service request. And it's unfortunate they're not here today to voice their opinions, but I'm just calling that out.
Yeah, because obviously one of the foundations of this was this whole discussion around common data within the request. And so we have effectively said we are not going to support any inheritance, basically, model of requests, and that the only way you can meaningfully share content across service requests is through supporting clinical information, and that if you are going to use notes, then that would be independent notes per service request. So we would have there is no shared order content apart from potentially a common document that the supporting information from each individual service request will reference.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of where we've come to. We've only got 5 minutes left. I will just quickly go through, just so we sort of round this out, on that discussion around notes. So in the fire request pattern, there in the R5 version, not the R4 version, this is newly added in R5. So depending on which version of the request pattern you're looking at, it'll have guidance on notes or not. So in the R5 guidance, which is new now, it has added some guidance on notes and related information. So, and this is where it says both the note and supporting info element provide additional supporting or contextual information about the overall request. However, they have slightly different purposes. So in that, in a note, and it says notes can be clinical or administrative in nature. Notes are associated with exactly one request instance. So this is the note we have now currently on the service request. Notes should never be used to reflect information conveyed in supporting info. So we've got things like we've added now pregnancy status, fasting. Well, fasting status isn't supporting info, but definitely pregnancy status is. It's saying that shouldn't be conveyed in notes as well. So. And then talking about supporting info. Supporting info is the information needed by the filler in order to be able to perform the order. In most cases, it refers to resource types that contain discrete information. Now, it's a bit vague, but basically references another resource. They're not my words, they're the fire guidance words. And then it talks about can reference a document reference containing ad hoc clinical notes. Where document reference is used to contain notes, they exist independently of the referencing request resource. They have their own maintenance cycle and can be linked to multiple requests or other resources. So I don't, again, here want to get too caught up about it being a document reference. I mean, before it said it could be an observation or a communication, but the guidance here is that the supporting info references a resource that can be referenced by multiple requests. Heath.
It is interesting that an earlier slide you presented, I think it was the one around requisition ID, where it was alluding to the clinical notes should be in an observation. And this is contrasting that.
Correct. And it's on the same page, right? So this is in the same pattern, same page. So it does contradict. So I don't think we want to get caught up on what it is. My next Menti, which we'll probably may have time, maybe not, was to say, what do we want?
Yeah, and the other one was I think the previous slide where you were basically saying it can be, no, clinical notes can be in notes.
Yes.
But they can't be in both.
Yes. Angus.
Yeah, I was say that's quite a change in the ServiceRequest.note description, because the old description said any other notes and comments made about the service request, and then it said, for example, internal billing notes, which left us all in doubt, like whether you could put clinical notes in there or not. And it's been clarified by that later one.
So the previous one says can be clinical or administrative. It's interesting. So this is in the request pattern, and then the supporting info. Back on the other one, but it can't be information that's conveyed in supporting info, and then supporting info. Here, to me, the dot points are more important than the others. It's about they exist independently of the referencing request resource, have their own maintenance cycle, and can be linked to multiple requests. I think to me, they're the key points here, as opposed to the type.
And I was going to comment on that as well, because I find, especially where it says document references and it says they exist independently of the referencing request resource, it gets really difficult. Like traditionally, I would argue that clinical notes are in the context of the request, right? They're not necessarily a note in the EMR about the patient. That they're not kept in the clinical record. They are contained by the request. They are the information provided to the lab in the request, not longitudinal clinical information on the patient's record, unless it's taken within the context of that request, right?
Yeah, I don't think this necessarily means it's just independent of the referencing request. So you can update the notes without updating the request.
You think they just mean technically it's in a separate resource, not clinically.
Yeah, whereas the other one, it's in the service request, so you have to update the service request to update the notes, right? So here you could update the notes in one place, and it applies to all the referencing.
Yeah, that would be a lot.
That's my take on it.
Yeah, I agree. It's probably a lot more sane.
So we're out of time today. So what we'll do in the next eRequesting TDG is we will summarise what we've talked about, the conclusion we came to. We'll come back in and just go through this again, because the next point that was going to be Menti, don't do this Menti now, we'll do it in the next TDG. But about, are there any sort of common supporting info resource types that we should consider for R1? So this is something to think about now. You can think about it now, between now and our next TDG next Thursday. Like, do we want something to model clinical notes? Do we want something else there? What, if it is, what type is it? Is it an observation? Is it a document reference? Is it something else, right? So these are things to think about. We'll come back around in the next meeting to talk about that. We'll also, I mean, depending on where we get to, talk about scope in the next meeting as well. I don't know how to jump ahead slides, but I will just really quickly. Oh, too far. Because we are out of time, I'll just jump to it. Just talking about the next meeting. So because we're out of cycle here, we've got the Connectathon over the next 2 days here in Sydney. Our next TDG is next Thursday, so 27th of March. We'll do a report back on the Connectathon. We'll summarise what we discussed in this meeting here today as well, and continue the conversation on notes and service request groups. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you at the next one.